respected Vice Chancellor and academic staff of Tilak Maharashtra Vidyapit, and my student friends. I am really honored to be invited to deliver a speech on the death anniversary of Bal Gangadhar Tilak. I sincerely thank Vice Chancellor and the descendants of the Tilak family for giving me an opportunity to speak about my research work on the relationship between Lokmanya Tilak and James Kerr Hardie. I want to give a small introduction about myself. I am a chartered accountant from India, and I currently own and manage an education company in the UK. We deliver university degree courses of Coventry University in business and entrepreneurship. We also have online courses developed in the field of metacognition, which is defined as thinking about thinking and the ways to comprehending ability to your maximum potential. The courses are designed by research scholars in the UK and are listed on our website siribloom.co.uk. We are just in the process of launching a course called Vedic Metacognition, which is the Oriental philosophy inspired by the Upanishads and the Vedas. However, the primary source of inspiration for me has always been Gita Rahasya. It is my humble contribution to the education sector, as our aim is to develop excellence in life as envisaged by the new education policy of 2020, which was launched by the Honorable Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi. I was always very passionate about history. In fact, I wanted to be a historian, but my mother insisted that economic survival could be very challenging and I should have a professional qualification. Hence, I became a chartered accountant. But my passion for history was never ever diminished. My research was a sheer coincidence. I happened to be in London. I happened to see a receipt of Tilak donating £2,000 to the Labour Party in 1918. Do you have any idea of what would be the worth of the £2,000 of 1918? Today, in today's terms, it comes to about £120,000, which is equal to 1.2 crore rupees. Tilak was not a rich man. Then why would he donate such a large amount to the Labour Party of UK? And if he was donating, had he any expectations that he would be getting something in return? I was restless and I could not stop thinking about it. After researching for more than 6 years and reading about 125 volumes from different sources like British Library and libraries in Oxford and Cambridge, I came to the conclusion that there was something much more behind that donation. It was not a political donation. Usually all the political donations have a quid pro quo, which means the recipient expects something in return for it. My book is going to reveal what is the secret behind the donation. Even though the idea of this research was mine, it has been penned by a close friend of mine, Mr. Umakant Tasgaonkar from Mumbai, and it has been published by Mr. Anand Limaye from Inking Innovations. This book was inaugurated by Honorable Chief Minister of Maharashtra, Shri Eknathji Shinde, and has received commendations from a very large number of judges from Bombay High Court as well as some judges from the Supreme Court. My research is about the relationship of Tilak and Hardie and how it contributed to the independence of India. Their relationship not only led to the independence of India, but also they established a new concept in politics, which is called the socialistic democratic welfare state, which is a viable and ethical form of government. My conclusion that Tilak and Hardie have not been given due credit, which they richly deserve for their role in shaping the history of Great Britain as well as India, as well as the modern world, The title of my book must be baffling a majority of you. While all of you should know who Lokmanya Tilak was, the father of Indian unrest, and his slogan, Swarajya is my birthright and I must have it. But how it contributed to the independence movement of India? The purpose of my book is to give them credit which they richly deserve as divine agitators, who introduced the principles of socialism and welfare state policies in the framework of democracy. Tilak was also a pioneer of crowdfunding entrepreneurship and established the principle of donations win elections, which is very much accepted norm of today. On the 6th of December 1918, Balaganandar Tilak donated £2,000, approximately £115,000 in today's money, to the then recently formed Labour Party of Great Britain. This high-profile donation was made by an Indian freedom fighter who was also condemned for sedition to an aspiring political party of the ruling country. Was Tilak rich enough to afford the donation of such a large amount? Not at all. But he was funded by donations from a very vast Indian population who believed in his political philosophy and revered him. This was a donation made by a person whose self-imposed mission was to overthrow the British Empire, which he regarded as the epitome of capitalistic exploitation. The fledgling Labour Party of Great Britain, the recipient of the donation, had its root in the trade union movement, whose primary objectives were fighting for safe working conditions, reasonable wages and improved living standards for the working class, as well as for the establishment of a British welfare state. The fight of the Labour Party was against economic exclusion of the British working class from the British government and the unfair taxation policies which were used to fund the military and naval expenses required to maintain the empire. These expenses only benefited a very tiny majority of the wealthy people. The result is that more than 50% of the people lived below the poverty line. Many faced abject poverty, which was not believable. The donation was directly made against the myth created by the capitalists and the imperialists of Great Britain that economic policies of laissez-faire were justifiable. The capitalist and imperial policies bred exploitation, racism and hatred globally. Remarkably, the British were very successful in creating this myth and sustaining it for a long period of 200 years. The true purpose of stealing wealth from the colonies was concealed in a very sly manner. The impact of Tilak's donation was substantial and which resulted in the Labour Party's rise to power. And this can be evidenced in the book. Unfortunately, some of the Indian freedom fighters like Mahatma Gandhi would have disapproved this Tilak's initiative and regarded it as bribery. Tilak's critics like Times of India and the British government officials were envious of his success in fundraising and made baseless allegations about him raising funds through use of coercion and force. It is indeed tragic that the political donations, legal or illegal, are the source of obtaining power through democracy. Corruption erodes the ethical democratic values. I do not think that there is a need for me to expand on this subject to my audiences from India. Now let me talk about Keir Hardie and how he established the British Labour Party, leading to his interactions with Tilak and his freedom movement of India. James Keir Hardie was born in 1856 and died in 1915. He was born in a very small village close to Glasgow and was the illegitimate son of a farm servant, Mary Keir Hardie. Hardie was close to his mom, who married a ship carpenter, David Hardie, and had 8 children with him. And his mom was mostly pregnant during Keir Hardie's young age. Keir Hardie experienced the hypocrisy of his wealthy Christian employers, and those left a bitter memory permanently in his mind. Hardie started working in coal mines at the age of 7 years on a barely survival wage for working over 65 years, so 65 hours per week. As he was the breadwinner for the family, he was self-educated when time permitted. He joined the temperance movement as a young man, and it was here that he honed up his skills, social skills, in debating, campaigning, organizing, and oratory. He widened his reading and aligned peace and non-violence with Christianity and awakened leadership qualities. At the age of 22, Hardie was elected as a secretary of the Lanarkshire Miners' Union, but was kicked out for his union activities. But he was lucky to be employed as a part-time journalist and continued to write on issues facing the miners. In December 1886, he accepted a job as a secretary of Ayrshire Miners' Union. His exposure to the miners' problem increased multifold, and he came to the opinion that he needed to come into the arena of politics in order to represent the miners. In 1887, 85 miners were killed in an accident in Erston, and Hardie suffered a personal tragedy that year with the loss of his 2-year-old beloved daughter. Liberal Party refused to support him in the by-elections at Mid-Lanark. However, it was only in 1892 Hardie won the general election in West Ham with the support of the Liberal Party and became a member of the Parliament. In 1893, he established Independent Labour Party. On 23rd June 1894, a massive disaster occurred in South Wales, killing 250 miners. Hardie was requesting that a vote of condolence be passed for these miners in the House of Commons. The same day, the Duchess of York gave birth to a son, and a resolution was passed congratulating the Duke and Duchess. This infuriated Hardie, and he thundered in the Parliament, "Mr. Speaker, I owe no allegiance to any hereditary ruler. I know nothing in the career of Prince of Wales. Sometimes we get a glimpse of him on the gambling tables, sometimes on the racecourse. His Royal Highness is the Duke of Cornwall, and as such he draws £60,000 from the duchy property in London, which is made of some of the vilest slums. From his childhood onwards, this boy will be surrounded by sycophants and flatterers by the scores and will be taught to believe himself as a superior creation of God. I protest against this motion being passed, and if there is any other member of the House who shares the principles I hold, I will carry my protest the length of division. The government will not find any opportunity for a vote of condolence with the relatives of those who are lying stiff and stark in the Welsh Valley." Hardie instantly became the best loved man in the whole country and was hugely abused by MPs, church, press and the public, but he flatly refused to apologize or withdraw his statement and stood firm on his principles. It was only in the year 1900 stability came when Labour Representative Committee was formed. Here Hardie now focused his attention onto the wider problems of the British Empire and the geopolitics. By 1907, Labour Party had 29 members in the Parliament, and Hardie embarked on a world trip in July 1907, visiting many British colonies. When he visited India, he came to know about the harsh realities of the caste system in India and the racial discrimination between the Indians, blacks and whites in South Africa. Massive poverty of the masses of the people in India resulting from high taxation on the farmers. Continuous unrest in India resulting from the religious feuds between Hindus and Muslims, and he was convinced that these were facilitated by the British rule. Economic exploitation based on color discrimination and sex discrimination. Wars being promoted by Britain throughout the world to expand their empire. A web of deceit created by the British to promote empire and creating poverty in Great Britain as well. Based on his strong ethical values, Hardie created controversies. He was uncompromising and radical, and the impression at the time of his death in 1915 was that he was a big failure. However, he had laid down a strong ethical foundation of the British Labour Party, which changed the political, social and economic conditions of Great Britain forever. Prime Minister Clement Attlee, 30 years after Hardie's death, installed all the welfare policies and which was then became accepted norm in the world. When Hardie came to India, he came to see Tilak in Pune. In Pune, there was an organization which invited Hardie, and the subject matter to be discussed was how Indians could get self-governance. Hardie had discussions with Tilak, and those discussions really went very well. Hardie and Tilak developed close friendships. Tilak assisted Hardie in taking him to small villages in India where Hardie was able to see the poverty levels, and Hardie himself was appalled. The poverty levels in India were far, far greater than the poverty levels in England. And this made Hardie very angry. And as a result of that, he started backing up all the policies what Tilak was executing. And that built up their friendship. What were the personal traits of Tilak and Hardie which made them the birds of the same feather? Great political leaders contribute ideas which make a difference to the world. If these ideas are based on truth, justice, piety, selflessness, equality and brotherhood, and their actions mirror those fundamental principles, then they achieve divinity. The mutual attraction that Hardie and Tilak had for each other was not a coincidence, but an overlap of their values. Hardie, in his book, India, Impressions and Suggestions, clearly states his view that the Indian National Congress of that time was not only not seditious, but ultra loyal. In his opinion, the Indian National Congress was very tame, incapable of any agitation to achieve the objective of self-rule. It was often suggested that Hardie's views on the British Empire in India were based on romanticism and utopian ideals, and that he did not understand what it would take to run a government in a complex country like India. Imperialists like John Morley accused Hardie of the most dangerous fallacy in supposing that India could borrow from Canada the democratic apparel which would be no more suitable than sporting a fur coat in the Deccan. What is forgotten here is great political leaders work on their gut feel, and his book India, Impressions and Suggestions reflects Hardie's interest in India based on his long-held admiration for the culture and the history of India. It was Hardie's utopian dream to fix India's political problems. The following is an analysis of what was common to the lives and philosophies of both Tilak and Hardie. As politicians, the parallels in how their people regarded them, both of them are very striking. The masses of the Indians regarded Tilak as an avatar of God, an incarnation of God. Likewise, the Indians elevated the status of Hardie as a savior, which irked the British establishment. Tilak's Anglo-Indian critics called him a genius of destruction, and the imperialist and capitalist called Hardie a traitor. Both men were at once the objects of unlimited veneration and unreasoning hatred by the enemies who were in the minority. And both were greatly loved by the masses of the people whom they sought to represent. Both men evoked the most contradictory and mutually hostile emotions amongst their countrymen and the British rulers. This was an extraordinary situation which has its root in the extraordinary achievements and their ability to see the ideal and the real in one frame. What was the secret of Tilak's hold upon the minds of men? Was it his great intellectual, his powerful personality, his aggressive statesmanship, his unfailing resourcefulness, his passionate love and for his country, or his daring courage? Or was it just the simplicity of his nature, the saintly life what he led, or his purity of character? Arguably, the key to hold over the masses was his ability to follow his values and principles in a clear and judicious manner without invoking a conflict between any of them. This was an ability he shared with Hardie. Hardie's actions stemmed from the true principles of Christianity, and his heart and head were controlled by those principles. All his actions can be benchmarked against the Christian philosophy without the clutter of rituals. His ethical foundations governed his actions, and the opinions of neither the masses nor the privileged rulers mattered to him. It was Tilak's interpretation of the Bhagavad Gita, the supreme moral and ethical code of the Hindus' religion, which governed his life and actions. Tilak, one of the most acclaimed scholars of his time, wrote his magnum opus, the Gita Rahasya, as a resolution of the mystery of Bhagavad Gita. The microanalysis he made of the conflicting human values of truth and falsehood, courage and cowardice, duty and responsibility, bravery and recklessness, democracy and autocracy, kindness and cruelty, humility and self-respect, and the determination of the righteous course of action amidst all these values was indeed the articulation of his political philosophy. The courses of action determined by Tilak and Hardie respectively were a result of the intuitive values which manifested in its purest form in both of them. Tilak and Hardie belonged to the category of men who saw vision of truth and became possessed by it, and before their supreme passion for truth, all baser instincts fell to ashes. The vision of truth gave these men a rare insight into the human mind, a power of detachment and a concentration to put vision into motion. An inherent and fierce rage against injustice was a common factor to both Tilak and Hardie. Their vicious attacks against injustice inflicted by the established authorities made them highly controversial. Both used their oratory skills and journalistic skills in such a devastating way that they were feared by the British establishment. Tilak's newspapers were Kesari and Maratha, the warrior class of India. Hardie's newspapers, the miner and the labor leader, though more humbly named, were equal in their zero tolerance against injustice. And similarly, their investigative journalism required outstanding courage. There was always an element of extreme ferocity, ridicule, and sarcasm in their writing. But these articles were written not from a personal malice or vendetta, but on a principle from the bottom of their hearts. The simplicity of their journalistic messages, the logical arguments which they put forward, were often found irrefutable even by many of their opponents, who had to fight based on status quo rather than logical progressiveness. For all the radicalness, all the radicalism, each moreover sought not to cross the line. Tilak's skills in journalism were accompanied by vast legal knowledge, and he always ensured that he remained within the framework of law. While Hardie had not had the privilege of a formal education, he had uncanny common sense. Not a single case of libel was ever filed against him, despite his harshest criticisms. Over several decades of writing, his newspapers were never closed on account of bans due to censorship. Hardie's principal commitment in life was the welfare of the working class and the establishment of a parliamentary political party for his class, which would win representation and power through elections, expediting the welfare reforms and bringing about social and economic parity in Britain. The clarity and the focus possessed by both meant that they refused to divert from their energies to any other strategy, howsoever noble, unless it had a direct impact on achieving their prime objectives. There were many social problems in both the countries. However, Tilak ring-fenced himself with his sole objective of Swaraj, or political self-rule, and refrained from undertaking any other activity which would conflict with his prime objective. Similarly, Hardie committed himself only to his main objective of forming an electable socialistic party, kept away from the liberals and the Marxists, and balanced the leftist, unionist, and true socialist views. Their uncompromising nature earned both the reputation of being very argumentative, obstinate, and both were carrying the principles to the extreme where necessary was a hallmark of was a mutual hallmark. Tilak's colleagues did not share his single-minded vision and did not see the relevance of religion and the creation of national heroes as a powerful tool building for the nation. The same was the case with Hardie. Most of his colleagues did not understand that winning power through the election process was the only one way to achieve the social and economic reforms which they were seeking to implement. Hardie has written a book titled India Impressions and Suggestions. And in this book, he quotes Professor Max Muller's views about India. If I were to look over the whole world to find out the country most richly endowed with all the wealth, power and beauty that nature can bestow, in some parts a very paradise on earth itself, I should point to India. If I were asked under what sky the human mind has most fully developed some of its choicest gifts, has most deeply pondered on the greatest problems of life, and has found solutions to many of them, which well deserve the attention even of those who have studied Plato and Kant, I should point to India. At the end of the 2 months visit to India, Hardie inscribed a parody of Burns' Highland Welcome in the hotel book at Tuticorin. He writes, "When the death's dark stream I ferry over, a time that surely shall come, in heaven itself I ask no more than just an Indian welcome." His love for India was always overflowing. Hardie's independent spirit rendered the song Bande Mataram. Hardie greatly admired the translation of the song by British civil servant W.H. Lee. Hardie strongly believed that singing praise of your own country should not be regarded as seditious. His national spirit and patriotism was never narrow. On the other hand, Tilak's respect for British values, British justice, British education and scholarship, British democratic institutions and a British discipline was reflected in several facets of his life. An educator by instinct and nature, Tilak always was a great admirer of all these virtues and hoped that Indians in the future would emulate them upon gaining independence. He regarded himself as a truly British when it came to these values. Once stating at a public meeting he addressed in Caxton Hall in London, "The Allies are enunciating throughout the world the principles of self-determination and democracy. I say, let Britain make a start in its own empire. I am called anti-British and seditionist, which is quite untrue. I am opposed to tyranny and oppression, but I am not hostile to the British and the British people. I will go one step further and say that I am as staunch a Britisher as anyone here. In some respects, I'm probably a better Britisher as I am putting into practice the teachings of British democracy and freedom. I am on the side of idealism that is being put forward as the ideals of the British nation. But I am all against all forms of tyranny anywhere in the world, and I hope that the right-minded Britons and the British democracy will listen to my appeal and help me to achieve the emancipation and the liberation of my country." Political and institutional values aside, simplicity and kindness were the most striking characteristics of both these men. Their tastes in life were very simple, their wants meager, and day in and day out their thoughts were focused only on the emancipation of the fellow countrymen from poverty and ignorance. Hardie would affectionately play with the mice in the mines during his younger days, eat his food from the same trough as the horse, and cuddle stray dogs on the street even when he was an MP. When Tilak was in the Mandale prison, he would feed the leftover grains to the sparrows that used to hop on his writing desk and on his shoulders. The jailer was amazed by the sight, asking why the birds did not fear him. Tilak replied that these birds were sure of his feeling of kindness to them. A criminal convict cohabituating with Tilak in the prison at Mandale, Vasudev Kulkarni, was appointed by the British to act as his cook and servant. Tilak never regarded Kulkarni as a convict servant and once told him, "You are a prisoner, so am I. You must not make such a fuss over me. I don't like this." Caring and taking responsibility for others was his natural instinct. Barrister R.E. Branson had been recruited by the British as acting Advocate General to represent the British government in the sedition case against Tilak in 1908. This sedition case resulted in Tilak's conviction and deportation to Mandale. However, although Branson was representing the British government, his sympathies were all with Tilak. He was subsequently expelled from his job because of these sympathies. Branson, in a subsequent attempt to practice as a barrister in India, was boycotted by the Indians for his role in the 1908 case. Branson finally died penniless in extreme frustration. His widow sent a letter to Tilak begging for £500 and Tilak sent her the money. Disregard for personal wealth for both Tilak and Hardie came from their commitment to their political objectives in life and from their simple lifestyles. Each one of them had given up opportunities of accumulating wealth and richness and living frugally did not cause them any distress. Living in a world where money was necessary, each earned enough for their survival, sometimes with a great difficulty, but did not succumb to the pressures of greed. Tilak even felt guilty using taxis when he visited London. Despite his ill health, Tilak similarly travelled simply, focusing instead on his ability to relate to the people and electorate. Simplicity of lifestyle for both Tilak and Hardie drew upon their respective moral and religious beliefs too. Hardie and Tilak were ardent agitators for temperance movement, and all their life they advised the society to give up alcoholic drink and improve the lives of their children. Notwithstanding the fact that each was declared unsuccessful in their ultimate mission by the time of their respective deaths, both Tilak and Hardie demonstrated absolute faith in democratic institutions and individual liberty. As agitators by nature, each used all the tricks in the book to ensure that the heat and the intensity of their cause was strongly felt by the opponents. For both Tilak and Hardie, their ends were divine, and they justified forceful means to achieve them. For example, Tilak's ferocious faith in democracy led him to abhor violence, and yet he remained ambivalent towards the idea of armed revolution, which was to him justified against the British Empire if there was no other possibility of success. Tilak's ideal was, as per the Mahabharata epic, drawing upon this, he believed that if all the doors of peace were closed to him, it would be necessary to fight wars, and even though they caused destruction and chaos. Hardie, meanwhile, lived in a well-established democracy via the institution of parliament and saw no need to resort to violence to achieve the changes he sought to achieve. Hardie's view was that British government of India was forcing Tilak to resort to violence by following policies of persecution and oppression. Both the self-proclaimed agitators' work consists of trying to stir divine discontent against the wrong. Tilak made it clear that since there was no democracy in India, he had taken upon himself to play the role of the opposition party against the British bureaucracy, a view which Hardie supported, given his view that Indian National Congress was not sufficiently forceful. Both Tilak and Hardie were passionate, highly strung, and aggressive in their agitations. Neither was easy to get along with. Neither lived to see the fruits of their lifelong endeavors. History, by its very analysis, by its very nature, is an analysis and the shaping of the future has its seed in the past. Both Tilak and Hardie embody the idea that a true verdict of success or failure cannot be made at the time of the death of a politician. Nonetheless, the parallels in their lives remain fascinating, and even today, their principles have withstood the test of time as pillars of modern democracy. The credit of introducing the concept of a socialistic welfare democracy as a viable form of government based on the principles of equality, liberty, and fraternity goes primarily to James Hardie, who formed the British Labour Party in 1900. Till then, the British Parliament was made up of mostly aristocrats and wealthy people, and the British rule can be described aptly as rule of the rich, by the rich, and for the rich. Women had no voting power, and nor the working class men who were earning below a set level of income by the parliament had no voting power. The laissez-faire economic principle ensured that the government collected most of the revenue through indirect taxes, like taxes from the salt. Every item of common man's consumption was taxed. The heavy burden of taxation was always on the poor. The taxes paid were to cover the basic cost of governing and for the defense of the country. The defense of the country basically was for expanding imperialism. There were no welfare schemes of any sort relating to health, insurance, and education paid for by the government. Magna Carta is wrongly described as the start of democracy. It just merely reduced the powers of a British monarch and transferred the powers partly to a powerful group of knights and squires. The French Civil War began with the beheading of the king and the queen of France, along with all the aristocrats, by a group of revolutionaries with the slogans of liberty, equality, and fraternity, and was the most disrupting result in a rule of vengeance, and was the reason why monarchy had to be brought back. The American Revolution was not truly establishment of democracy and succeeded in just overthrowing the British imperialism, offering no rights to the black Americans. The American Civil War, 1861 to 1865, just set aside the slavery for the Afro-American community under the leadership of Abraham Lincoln. However, the blacks did not have any civil rights till 1968, when Martin Luther King Jr. succeeded in getting those rights from the white people. The communist philosophy of Karl Marx was a major failure and has been always autocratic in nature. A true operating socialistic welfare democracy must have, number one, elections at regular intervals, which are held with honesty and integrity. Organization of political parties and a regulatory framework must exist in order to have democratic elections. Welfare policies for all the citizens. Equality of opportunity and human rights. Freedom of speech and respect and tolerance of religions, traditions and culture. Rule of law. This form of government was created by the Labour Party, and its philosopher was James Hardie. The role what Tilak played in this in establishing this form of government was Tilak gave substantial donation to Labour Party, which put them into power. On 18th of March 1931, Churchill had given a speech at the Royal Albert Hall in London, criticizing the conservative leaders for joining hands with the socialists in cooperating with Gandhi, whom he used to call naked fakir. Churchill had the utmost contempt of the Hindus. Churchill appealed to the duty of the British towards the people of India, who would become prey to the Brahmin oligarchy if self-rule was granted. He regarded the Hindu-Muslim feud as a bulwark of British rule in India. Churchill's chain of reasoning hinged on the fact that although the Indian National Congress was secular in its principles, it was nevertheless composed mainly of the Hindus. If the Congress failed to agree to share power with the Muslim League, the British could always claim that their relinquishing of India would tantamount to abandoning the vulnerable Muslim minority to Hindu rule. The age-old policy of divide and rule was at its play. Churchill was not even a minister in those days and came to power as a prime minister only after the outbreak of the Second World War in the year 1939. And it was only then that his opinions really mattered as regards the dominion status of India. He became the decision-making authority as a prime minister. His rhetoric about Brahmin oligarchy reached its peak. In 1942, when Sir Stafford Cripps was sent to win the support of the Indians in the war, dominion status was on offer only and only if all the Indian parties agreed to it, and no province would be forced to join in the new constitutional arrangement. The conservative parties were distressed with this offer, and Leo Emery, the Secretary of State for India, compared it to a virtuous maiden selling herself for ready money. They were, however, reassured that the government had no intention of granting dominion status to India, and that this was a ploy to seek the Indian cooperation, which was vital in the war effort. Mahatma Gandhi understood this game and called Cripps' proposal a post-dated check on a bankrupt bank. Launching his Quit India movement in 1942, and along with all Indian leaders, he was imprisoned during the war period. Churchill was a hardcore and ruthless imperialist, and he had decided that after the World War was won, there was no obligation to honor the promises that had been made at difficult times and not taken up by the Indians, and carry out a great regeneration of India based on extinguishing the landlords and oppressive industrialists and uplift the peasants and the untouchables. He wanted to kick out viceroys like Lord Wavell and send a new army of 100,000 young British soldiers to India under a revitalized, energetic commander who would commit himself for maintaining India as a part of the empire. However, the unexpected awesome defeat of the Conservative Party in the general election of 1945 resulted in Churchill's imperial dreams evaporating. The Labour Party was already changing the face of Great Britain through its socialistic initiatives, which were people-centric, and the Labour Prime Minister Clement Attlee had already taken a decision to grant independence to India. The Conservative efforts to rally suitable allies for saving the British imperialism in India by forming a united front of Muslim states, untouchables and the Sikhs did not receive any response. Churchill's effort to incite them failed miserably. Opinion polls confirmed that British expectation was that Britain should retain India until a new constitution was established and then to grant India the dominion status. For many, not only for the conservatives, but British India was also still the embodiment of British power and self-esteem and jewel in the crown. The Labour Party would have faced massive boomerang if the decision to retreat from India had been perceived to be a dishonourable one. The decision to withdraw by a particular date without any settlement formula in place was at least biggest gamble. And if there was no settlement between the Indian parties resulting in chaos, the Labour government would not have been pardoned by the British electorate. Attlee made a categorical statement that the Indian situation had been inherited from the Conservative government. Further, Attlee announced that the policy of the Labour government to grant freedom to India was based on moral and ethical grounds, especially having regard to the great contribution made by India in terms of the loans and its sacrifices of 30,000 soldiers in the war effort. These arguments shook the very grounds on which the Conservative Party stood. Attlee and his colleagues were highly adept and competent, and their choice of Mountbatten as a viceroy, the declaration of a fixed departure date, and the breakneck speed at which they executed the transfer of power was remarkable. The Labour government skillfully avoided all the questions relating to the issue, on the grounds that secrecy was necessary in negotiations and shortened the process of the passing of the Indian Independence Bill to the extent possible. It would have been impossible for the Conservatives to play any mischief in delaying its approval. Labour created a myth that Indian independence was the great accomplishment of Britain's decade-old policy of preparing India to receive her freedom, a process which was alleged to have a cross-party support and would promote a new era of cooperation between Britain and the Indian subcontinent. The National Union Executive Committee of the Conservative Party was anxious not to attack its leader, Winston Churchill, but passed a resolution to reaffirm itself as the great imperial party and applauded the delegate who described transfer of power in India as casting of pearls before a swine, which truly reflected the Conservative High Command's feelings. However, the Conservative Party was powerless, and resignedly they watched the foundation of the British Empire being destroyed. From the above, it is very clear that if the Conservatives would have won the elections in 1945, they would not have granted independence to India. The trouble was that Churchill had outlived the imperial ideas and that he cherished. The word imperialism had become now demonized, having become an abusive word synonymous with oppression of the weak by the strong, cloaked in the theory of biological and racial superiority. Churchill's greatest achievement has been to overthrow the overthrow of Italy, Germany and Japan, whose theories of racial and biological superiorities had been accompanied by cruelty, mass murder and enslavement. The British amassed massive loot from India, currently estimated at $45 trillion at today's values, as against India's current GDP of $3.6 trillion, by crushing its industrial power and creating unemployment where people were forced back into agriculture. The agriculture sector was taxed so high that it resulted in man-made famines. The famines and accompanying diseases like plague, malaria, typhoid and tuberculosis ravished the plains of India, killing approximately 70 to 80 million people during the years 1765 till 1900. There were 10 major famines, all man-made during this period. In any case, the British were blinded with greed, and the lives of the Indians were inconsequential to them. The wealth in terms of gold and silver, along with the most valuable jewels, were stolen from India. No country anywhere in the world was economically raped as much as India, and hence the British Empire regarded India as the jewel in the crown. It was this injustice of the British Empire which angered Tilak and Hardie. The conclusions I have drawn are as under. Tilak had a great pride in Hinduism and its achievements during the Vedic era. He was the first Indian to vehemently create pride and awareness through public celebrations of Ganpati festival and Shiv Jayanti in India. Tilak wrote Gita Rahasya, a critical commentary on Bhagavad Gita, which aroused the national spirit, impressing the Indian people that to fight for independence of India was not only their birthright, but it was also their fundamental duty in life. Tilak was very pragmatic, and for him, any means justified the goals, so long as the goals were ethical. Tilak was in favor of using any means to obtain the independence of India, and these means included legal battles with the British and establishing the legal principle that criticism of the government regulations was not seditious. Fully supporting the revolutionaries in a clandestine way without getting caught legally. Promoting a culture of patriotism through his impeccable character both in Hindus and Muslims. Showing a deep understanding of geopolitics and building strong relationships with the British Labour Party. Tilak clearly understood that fundamental principle of the Labour Party was destruction of crony capitalism and implementing welfare policies which were ethical. Tilak was aware that imperialism could not survive and that it was incompatible with a pure capitalism and ethical welfare policies. It was unimaginable at that time that the greed for empire would lead to another round of destruction and that Second World War would destroy imperialism itself. When Labour government came to power, they took an immediate decision to grant independence to India. But execution of that decision took 2 years because of the internal political situation in India. British left India of their own accord. They were not forced out because it was not economically worth their while to rule India. This was the view of the Ethical Labour Party in 1945 and Tilak's close ties with the labour leaders and his donation as well led to India's independence. Tilak and Hardie's vision was that in about 25 years of Home Rule, India would be ready for complete independence. But destiny was such that destruction of the British military and naval might was necessary to pave the way for India's independence. I pray to the Almighty God that India achieves the glories of the past era and leads the peace and prosperity in the world. If we continue to keep our faith in leaders like Tilak, we will definitely reach our objectives. So, on this note, I want to reiterate that Lokmanya Bal Gangadhar Tilak was a great visionary. Won't you agree with me on that? He is a diver of all the patriotic people who want to make India a great nation once again. Thank you. Jai Maharashtra. Jai Hind.